Welcome to part 8. We've made it to part 8. Thank you for being here. Okay, so we've been working with this SQLite thing so far, and it's totally fine for development. However, getting this into production, you never want to use SQLite. It's just not efficient. It's slower. It also, if you're launching an app in really like following the 12-factor way, which is what we're trying to do here, it's stored on the disk, and your server, in theory, should be able to be wiped and rebuilt from scratch at any given moment without losing any important data. And that's why SQLite is not really a good thing. We want to be running our database in something else. Also, Postgres is just a better database. So we're going to talk about setting that up now. So first thing you are going to need Docker to do it this way. Now, you don't necessarily need Docker to use Postgres. I just think this is the best way to do it. You can just install Postgres and set it all up yourself and everything, but I do recommend getting Docker, downloading it, getting it running, and starting it up. So let me just start up Docker. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new file right in the root of our directory called docker-compose.yaml. Like that. I'm going to do YML, not YAML, but YML. YAML might work, but this is at least what I normally do. Okay, so a YAML file is it's a configuration file. It's much like JSON, but it kind of falls more into Python methodologies because it's just indentation based. It's not, it's not quotation marks and strings and all this kind of stuff. And what I'm going to do is, this will be on the GitHub, you can just grab it, but basically we are going to set the version to 3, and that's just the version of the Docker Compose API, basically configuration version. And we're going to create one service. It's going to be called DB. We're going to be using Postgres 13.2 Alpine. You can use any Postgres image, but this is just the one I'm using. And we can tell it where to put it. And in this case, we want the volume to be mounted within our main directory. There's gonna be a folder called data, then DB, and then, mounting it to where the data actually exists in this image. Then we're gonna set some environment variables on it. We're gonna set the name of the DB to Postgres, the user to Postgres, and the password to Postgres. And then we're gonna map port 5432 to 5432, basically keeping them the same. Then what we want to do is we want to run docker-compose up and then -d. And let's just make sure Docker is running. So I have Docker, I have nothing started in it. These are just some containers from some other projects. And we'll just run that, docker-compose up d. The -d is just going to mean it's going to detach it once it's set up, which is what we want. And we should see here that it started. And inside it, there should be one image here. And this is our database. Okay. So now what I want to install, because we're going to start using Postgres, is we're going to install something called DJ database URL. So we'll do pip install DJ _database _URL. And let's just make sure we grab that. So it successfully installed this, and we'll go to our requirements, and we'll just make sure that this is here. Change this to an equal sign like we've done many times. And yeah, I think right there is kind of the alphabetical spot. And that's so if we ever, delete our environment, our virtual environment, we can easily get everything installed without having to remember what we installed. That's what this requirements file is. Okay, so let's do that. Then in our settings file, specifically our database settings, right now we have it mapped to SQLite. But instead, what we're going to do is we're going to import that package we just made, import DJ database URL, and for our database itself, instead of doing this SQLite thing, we're just going to set the default to DJ database URL, the package we just installed, .config. And what this will automatically do is it's going to look for something in our environment or in our .env file called database URL. So let's actually put that in. And for this, we just need to know what our URL will be. And based on the Docker Compose, we know what the database name is, we know the user, we know the password, we know the port. And essentially, we can construct that into a URL simply like this. So it's just Postgres : // then it's the username : the password, the host, which we're running on localhost, then the port, then the name of the database. So there we have that. And we're going to save this file. And let's just go python manage.py run server. And we'll see we have some issues here because we have to install one more thing. We need to install scop pg2. So let's install that as well. Pip install scop pg2. And this is basically just the Python's client library to talk to Postgres. And we'll let that go. Meanwhile, I'm going to get my requirements open and ready because we're going to want to copy this in as well. And let's go right at the bottom. Just make sure you do that in the right spot because there's a bunch of numbers. Just make sure it's the last hyphen you're getting rid of to replace it with 2 equal signs. Now let's try again, run server. And we are good. The only thing is we have 51 unapplied migrations because this is a totally new database, right? Like, in fact, I'm going to delete my database right here because we're no longer going to be using it. And what we'll do is we'll run migrate. And we can also load our fixtures in. The fixtures are database agnostic. It didn't matter if it was SQLite or not. So we have a command for this in our make file. Let me just remember what it is. Import fixtures. So let's run import fixtures. Now, we don't have any fixtures for our user because we forgot to make those. So we are also going to have to do python manage.py create superuser once again. And we'll just do Tyler. And there we go. And let's do a make run. And let's go back to our backend, manage, and let's log in. And make sure we still have access. And we do, and this is great now. So we're actually not using SQLite anymore with those simple changes. We are actually running a database in Docker. And for instance, if we were to stop this container, which I can do by clicking stop, and restart, I'm actually getting an error. I can't connect to it, saying, hey, nothing's there, I can't connect. So we know, we're not using that file anymore. So yeah, that was a little, tiny bit more to set up than obviously SQLite. But definitely a requirement, before going to prod, and frankly, probably something you would do right at the start of the project. There's not really a need to use SQLite. It's just as easy to really do this, especially if you're planning on using Postgres in the long run, which I highly recommend. Okay, that's cool. All right, so what I want to show now is how can we get this running on a remote server? Now, there's many ways to do this. One, you could just set up like an Amazon EC2 and basically clone your project into there and set up all the stuff manually, maybe following a tutorial, SSHing in when you need to do things, and but it's not really the way to do it in 2024, and actually hasn't been for a while, except in very unique cases. There's lots of great platforms out there that will sort of manage your whole app for you. And all you really have to do once it's set up is commit your changes and it will take care of it. So I've hummed and hawed over, what service should I show? Because I've used quite a bit. There's Heroku, there's Render, there's DigitalOcean app spaces, there's things like Porter, which uses like Kubernetes and a whole bunch of stuff, and various other ones too, and some within AWS. I think, for our purposes, we're going to use DigitalOcean just because it's, pretty cost effective, pretty easy to set up. Yeah, I just really like the service. Okay, so in order to do this, we of course need a DigitalOcean account, and we also need our code to be version controlled, which is actually something we haven't even talked about. It's not really a Django specific thing. It's, generally coding any kind of app. You need to have version control. So let's actually set that up first. So first what I want to do is I'm going to make a new file called .gitignore, because there's certain files that we definitely don't want to be version controlled. For instance, I can run git init right now, and we'll actually do a git status, and we'll see there's tons of things that aren't, being tracked, or that are being tracked right here. They haven't been committed or pushed yet, but they, would be if I just move forward. But I don't want to be, version controlling my database. Like, this is a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't make sense. So first of all, I'll just write in here, we're just gonna go data/. This will ignore that whole data folder, and you'll see in VS Code it's no longer green. I also definitely don't want to be version controlling my .env file, because that has my sort of like secret keys and stuff in it. And even if they're not secret, they're, you know, essentially like used for development purpose. You don't really want them to be put in your code. It's going to get it's going to interfere with other developers' workflows, that kind of thing. There might be some various other things, but what I like to also do then is go to gitignore.io. And what I'm going to do is type in Django, Python. I'm on Mac, so I'm going to do Mac OS because that will get rid of some other things. And this will actually generate us some stuff we can actually put in here. So I'm just going to copy everything, Command A, Command C, and after my sort of custom ones, I'm going to put all this stuff in. And this will just make sure that things like, yeah, our db.sqlite 3 doesn't get, you know, put in there. Not that we have that anymore, we've deleted it. There's various like Python things that don't need to be in version control, like, you know, compiled files and stuff like that, docs, like, et cetera, et cetera. And look, .env is already in here, that's great. It also, our virtual environment's not being tracked, like right here it is, but if I do a git status now, it's gone because that was in there too. So we definitely want to do that. And then I'm going to commit this. So we're going to go git add dot git commit dash m initial commit. And if I try to push now, I will get an error because I actually haven't set this up with anything remote. So let's go to GitHub. And I will make a new repository. And we're going to call this DJ for, or maybe actually Django for beginners. You can, of course, call this whatever you want. You can make it private. You probably will. I'm keeping mine as public because this will be included in the show notes. And yeah, we will go and everything else is good. Then I just want to go and copy this git remote add origin and then git push -u origin main, which will push it up to main. And now I actually have my code. If I refresh this, you know, version control, I don't have a README or anything. You know, you might want that, but, and I probably will have one by the time this course is released. But yeah, so I have this here now. Next, I'm gonna go to DigitalOcean, and I'm gonna mention that what I am showing right now, if you can learn how to do it here, even just by watching, and you go to Heroku, or you go to, you know, render.com, or there's tons of other ones. You can even, I believe, host a Django app on Vercel now, which is kind of cool. The process is going to be pretty similar. So let's go to DigitalOcean. And I'm just going to log in. You'll obviously have to probably create an account. And I'm just going to create a whole new project to keep this separate, and also because I'm probably going to want to delete this once, you know, once I'm done with this tutorial. So I'm just going to call this Django for beginners. And I don't care about description. Yeah, this is a class project or educational purposes, I would say. Okay, then we're going to skip this. And here we go. So now there's a whole lot that DigitalOcean has to offer. They have, you can just create droplets, which are kind of like an Amazon EC2, just like a one-off Linux box that you can fully manage, a virtual, you know, virtual machine generally. They have functions, which are like, you know, Lambda functions, basically like serverless functions. They have a whole Kubernetes thing if you're feeling really, you know, you're trying to build something big and you have a lot of moving parts. They have stuff for stores, they have stuff for databases, containers, images, like all these kind of things. And we're going to use App Platform, though. And App Platform is kind of like, it's fairly, I mean, in the grand scheme of DigitalOcean, it's fairly new. And it allows you to essentially, you know, create something. So I am going to, how do I change? So I'm going to create a new app. I'm going to make sure I choose the right project after. Am I in? I need to make sure this is selected, I think is the problem. Django for beginners, and then go App Platform. Okay, it doesn't, but we'll get it. Anyways, we'll create the app, and I'm going to choose GitHub, and we're going to select a repository. Now, I need to configure this to allow certain repositories to come in. So I'm going to just pick me, and for this, I'm just going to do select ones, and I'm specifically going to pick the Django for beginners one. I'm going to go install and authorize, and I'm just getting a little one-time password thing, 1 sec. I verified that. I'm just going to pick Django for beginners. And we're going to use the main branch. You could, of course, you know, map, if you're building like a, you know, a staging version of this, you can map it to a different branch. And we'll keep source directory as this, and we'll click next. Okay, now what we need to do is actually set some environment variables here. Actually, well, I guess we'll add resource first. We will add a database. So I'm going to click add database. Oh wait, sorry, hang on. Let's start with this. Select from source code. Oops. Sorry, I have not done this in a little bit. Okay, let's just go skip to review. Okay, let's go back to environment variables. So we're going to edit our environment variables because we actually need some things in here for this to work. So for instance, debug mode, I'm going to do it as true for now, just so we can kind of see if something goes wrong. Obviously, we'd want to set that to false later. I'm going to call this environment, and we're going to call this prod. Secret key, and here's where you'd probably want to generate something really random. I'm just going to kind of grab some of this and some of this and whatever. I'm going to be taking this down, so I'm not too worried about someone, finding out what my secret key is. And then database URL, we are going to have to put in after we actually get our database set up. So we'll just click that and click next. We'll use this region, sure, and we'll go next. And let's just create the resource. So it's going to append. Now we are getting an error because we don't actually have a database set up yet. So that's what we will have to do in a moment. And by clicking on the build logs, you can kind of see what's happening. So it's, it's selected the branch, it's detecting stuff. So it's found Python just because we have like a requirements.txt. It's, kind of doing this stuff. So right now it's installing Python, it's installing SQLite 3, it's installing all the Django stuff in our requirements.txt, and so on and so forth. Now this will create an error because we don't have a database environment variable set. So what I've done is I click on databases here. I've just opened a new tab just so I can come back to it easily. And we're just going to choose Postgres in this case. And we'll just do everything basic because I just want to keep this cheap, even though I'll be deleting it. And I'll select, my correct project, and we'll create the database cluster. And we'll let that do its thing. Let's come back here. So we do get a build failed because it's, like I said, it says actually secret key was not found, which is interesting. Maybe it's not actually grabbing the variables, but let's look into that now. So go back to my app platform. We'll go to our jellyfish app, as it called it. And let's go to settings. And let's look at the environment variables. Oh, you know what? I think I... Okay, so we're going to edit the environment variables here, which I believe is done in settings. I was doing the environment variables, I think, in like a global state, but I meant to be doing them here. So let's just grab these again. Debug true. Let's add a new one. Environment prod. Add a new one. Secret key. And we'll grab something random. And we'll just save that. Okay, so it's been updated, and because we've done an update, it's actually going to try and rebuild it. So if we go to the build logs, we'll see this kind of doing the whole process again. It's always going to build it from scratch. That's how containerized apps work, and it is the proper way to do things. You don't want your state to kind of be like changing based on file system changes. You always want to know what to expect there, which is why, we can't use something like SQLite. We want to use a separate database, which is still setting up here, but we'll get that soon. So after letting the logs run for a bit, we see we have a different error this time. Database URL not set. That makes sense, and we're going to solve that in a moment. Let's go back to our database. We see it is completed and ready to go. And if we go on the overview page, we can see the parameters here. And they give you this nice thing where we can actually do connection string. And this will actually give us this. I will click show password, and I'm going to copy this. Actually, I don't think it's actually copying everything correctly. Let me bring this in here. Obviously, I'm doing this on a stream right now, and people can see my password, but I can always roll this and change it. So I'm just trying to copy this password here. I guess I can go back to connection parameters and grab that. I think is the dash part of it. I guess so. Let me make sure. Seems to be. So we'll actually just put that there, and then I'm going to grab this, and we're going to go back to our app, under settings, and we're going to go to environment variables, and we're going to do database URL and set this right here. Just make sure that everything is good, and we're going to click save. And we'll let that build. All right, next, we got past that error just by getting the database URL, but the new error we're seeing now is something about static files. And that's something we haven't talked too much about. But essentially, the development server, when you're using it, automatically does something called collect static. And that basically takes all your files that you have in your source directories, the different packages and stuff for your CSS for your admin or whatever, and kind of bundles them all together. And gets served by the development server, but it's not really a way we can do it in production. Instead, either we want to be hosting our files kind of on a CDN somewhere if it's really important, or we can use something called white noise. So let's just look up white noise, which I should probably write Django as well, so we get some proper Django. And we can look at this docs here and see how to use it. So first of all, we need to install white noise. So let's do that. I go do pip install white noise and make sure we have the correct spelling of install. And here we go, white noise 6.0. Okay, cool. So we'll throw that in our requirements because we're going to need that. Requirements, and that can be right at the bottom alphabetically. Then we need to add some middleware. So we have our middleware.py if you followed along with the way we broke up our settings. If not, this will just be inside your settings file. And essentially, we need to add this to the very end, whitenoise.middleware.whitenoise middleware. Lastly, in our storage, or where do I have this? I think it's maybe static.py, where we have our static URLs. We need to say what our static file storage is going to be. In this case, we want to use static files storage as whitenoise.storage, like compressed static file storage. All right, so now what I'm going to do is commit these changes. Commit-m, white noise static file middleware, and push that. And what's cool is the way we've set this up is because we're pushing something to the main branch, it's actually going to trigger a new build for us right over here. So if we actually go back to our sort of app here, we'll actually see that Jellyfish app is building right now. And if we go to the build logs, we'll sort of see this same process happen again. So let's see what happens. So we got this error now, disable, that's saying that we need to have, there was a problem collecting static. And that's because we don't actually collect static in when we're using white noise. So we're going to create this other environment variable by going to settings, environment variables. It's called disable collect static, and we'll just set it to 1 and click save. And we'll watch our build logs once again. And with that change, we see it successfully did some stuff. So I think we're good. Yeah, build complete. It's uploading the app, and we give it another minute and we should be able to visit this site. It's still pending, but let's just give it one more minute. Okay, so although the build worked fine and it was successful, the deploy failed because we haven't actually told, DigitalOcean what to do once everything's built. It's just kind of like, okay, now what? So with this, we're going to do, we need to create what's called a proc file. So it's just called proc file, uppercase P, no extension. And in here, we're going to create something called release and, web. And within this, we are going to basically put in a command of what to run. And in this case, we want to run unicorn, and we do project.wsgi, which is just a pathing to this, project.wsgi. And then we just want to say log file dash. I missed a F. Which reminds me, we also need to install unicorn. So let's do pip install unicorn. And we want to make sure this is in our requirements file. So let's put that in there. Equals, and somewhere around there. Now what we can also do in here are a few other things, which we'll get to at a later time. But for now, I'm going to just commit these. We'll just say proc file added, and we'll do git push. And we should see the new deploy starting to happen, and we'll just let this go through and see what happens. And I made a little typo. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's log dash file. Dash dash log dash file, then another dash. All right, I'm going to commit that, and we'll see what happens. All right, we're getting somewhere here. Just let it go through, and we are booting the worker now, which seems like the right thing. It's still deploying, but we're almost there, I believe. All right, everything looks good, and it gives us a link to go to live app. And if we go here, oh yes, this makes sense, allowed hosts. So we need to allow this to be visited, which is part of our Django settings. However, I realized if we have debug mode to true, that shouldn't be showing up, but it seems to be anyways. Okay, so we need to fix that. Let us just copy this, and we'll go to our settings. This would be security, I think. No, access, allowed hosts. Yes. So I'm gonna add localhost in here as well as this. And obviously this is something you could set as an environment variable, which is definitely the appropriate thing to do. But for purposes of just getting this working, let's do that. And I realized the reason it is doing this is because we've actually explicitly set allowed hosts. We could have just done, if we didn't have that variable at all, it would have let us do this in debug mode, but it still wouldn't have allowed us to do it in production mode. So we have to do this anyways. I just want to explain why this is coming up, even though debug mode is on. Okay, so this is all gone, and now if I go here, I don't have that error anymore. I do have a 404 error, which makes sense. And let's try to go to /manage. And we're getting this error now. Okay, and this is why I like, it makes sense to kind of have a debug mode turned on when you're first kind of getting your production app up, because otherwise we'd have to look at the logs to see what was happening. And we're seeing, okay, looks like a database error, and the reason is we have a new database, we haven't run migrations on it. So what we can do is right here, there is a console option. And this actually allows us to basically access our app through console. And if we actually do an ls here, we'll see we're in the root of our project where we have our manage.py somewhere. There it is, manage.py. So we can actually run python manage.py migrate. And this will go through and do all the stuff that we've seen, a million times. And I don't have to deploy again because this was just a database error. If I refresh now, we will see we have the Django admin and everything's good. Now to log in, again, fresh database, we're going to have to do our create superuser. And here I'd probably want to make a more secure password, but for the purposes of learning, we won't worry about that because I'm going to be deleting this anyways. And now I should be able to log in with that same info. And we're in, which is great. And similarly, we should be able to go to our /content/tracks, I believe it was, and we'll actually see this right here, and we can, make a test track. Now we are going to have a problem with this because this is required and we don't have this, so we'd have to make it through the back end initially, unless we ended up building all the forms we needed, but you get the idea. We're up and running, everything's good. Now something else to keep in mind, in your proc file, you might also want to have a release function. And here we would want to do something like python manage.py migrate. And that'll, if there are any new migrations, it'll run it before the app actually boots, meaning, we wouldn't have had that issue before. And there's various other things we can put in here too, but that's a problem for another day. So yeah, I think we're good. Now, if you want to use Heroku, if you want to use Render, honestly, it's virtually the same process. You connect, GitHub repository, you set your environment variables, you set up a database, you configure everything, and you deploy. And in fact, this same setup using a proc file, which is kind of like a Heroku standard, actually, that other cloud providers have sort of like adapted. This will work on virtually all of them. So yeah, that's about it. We got something online, and yeah, you can, of course, feel free to put it up your own project on DigitalOcean or use anything. I'm not saying DigitalOcean's better. There's pros and cons of all of them, but this is kind of the same process regardless of what platform you're on. All right, we'll catch you in the next one.